Welcome to Bayer's the Walpoles demo site here in Norfolk. It's a new site. We've moved slightly down the road from where we were at Long Sutton previously. And I'm joined here today by my colleague Darren Adkins, who's the local technical manager here for the site, and someone who'll be well known to many of you, Dr. Aoife O'Driscoll from Niab, one of the serial pathology team there. And obviously we're here in the field today to have a look at the crops that we have in our demo here, a number of the varieties, discuss disease levels and management for the next few weeks and months going through the season. So Daz, it's the 3rd of April today as we stand here. A couple of questions initially. Firstly, for this site, then I'll come to Aoife to maybe a more national picture. How was the autumn for the Walpoles, and the level of how well did the establishment go for the crops? When did you get drilled? And then really, what sort of state are they in at the moment here at the site?
Well, I guess a lot of people can remember last autumn we started off with quite a dry spell in September. A lot of people held off drilling for grass weed control. Then we got into that wet period, and I was starting to get slightly worried as we got later and later into October that we wouldn't get this site drilled. But in the end, we drilled this site on the 8th of November into really quite nice conditions. Okay, it meant that the crop was backward all through the winter. It didn't look particularly good coming through into the spring, but as you'll see in a minute, the crop now is looking particularly well. It's got hold of some fertiliser and it's starting to move away. So I'm quite pleased with the establishment we've got.
Excellent, cheers mate. So more nationally from yourself and probably what the Niab regional agronomists may be reporting back, Aoife, is that the same everywhere, or do you think there's a bit more of a regional split?
Yeah, so I'd say exactly the same really. So I think that the two types of crops that we're seeing are evident on this site. So we've got the trial here, the demo crop itself, but also the farm crop that's right next to it. And two of them are very, very different growth stages, but the disease pressures between them are only slightly different. But generally things are looking very, very good. Things have established well. Whether you got crops in October, November, overall people are very kind of comfortable with how they look in terms of the crop health, and they're just starting to think now about how they can maximise yield, maximise tiller number, and what's the best that they can do for those crops going into the springtime.
Great, so that sort of gives us an intro into where we are here and what we're going to discuss. So we'll probably go on now to talk a little bit more about the disease threat and indeed some of the varieties here. We've got 30 odd varieties here at the site. We can pick one or two and talk a bit more about them in detail as well. So then, the two of you, what are we sort of finding here at the site? I mean, November drilling, we might traditionally think, lower disease levels than we would if it had gone in 6 weeks earlier. And obviously we've got varieties that we traditionally think, that's a classic for certain diseases that we almost run to see whether we're getting rust or septoria appearing. I'll come to you first, Daz. You talk specifically maybe about the site here at the Walpoles, and then Aoife to give a more eastern sort of perspective perhaps on what they may be seeing at Niab, and maybe some of the early samples that may be sent in if we're getting any indicators in certain varieties. So off to you first.
Well, what we're seeing here at the Walpoles, contradictory to what you might expect from a November drill crop, we did actually see quite a lot of septoria bubbling about on the lower canopy. The last few weeks have been fairly dry, so that has dried up a little bit. Surprisingly for this part of the world, we'd expect to see yellow rust this time of year. Can't find any in there yet, but it will be coming at some point, I'm sure. And likewise, we found very little brown rust either. So at the moment, we're looking at reasonably low disease pressure. Weather conditions could change that as we go through the season. We're looking at the usual varieties, so a Skyfall for yellow rust, not quite seeing it in there, and your Crusoe type varieties for brown rust, and finding very, very little in there at the moment. But it's a case of monitoring those varieties as we go through towards T0 and then T1, and adjusting fungicide programs nearer the date.
Over to you, Aoife, sort of a slightly wider picture, and anything you've seen that's a bit unusual maybe this year?
Yeah, so the less unusual things really are just what Darren talked about there. So a lot of septoria bubbling at the base. That's probably overwinter material that's kind of sat there and has been subjected to the rain splash events that we've had kind of January, February, March. We're moving into a very dry period now, so hopefully that will keep that in check. In terms of rust pressure, brown rust has not been that much of an issue in most varieties this season compared to last season, which will probably give people a lot more peace of mind. but people are still very conscious now of brown rust in the kind of usual varieties, so Crusoe for example. So most crops of Crusoe this season, if you're in that high risk area where you had it last year, will probably be getting a T0. And then in terms of yellow rust pressure this year, it's definitely a lot worse than it was last year. And we know this from the samples that are coming in through the UK CPVS. So that's the UK Cereal Pathogen Virulence Survey. If you don't know what that is, it's where we test for new strains of yellow rust coming into the country and into different parts of the UK. So we do know that samples coming in, and through recommended list trials that there is more yellow rust pressure out there. Maybe perhaps on varieties that we don't normally see that in. So I think that could be the one to watch this season, definitely on certain varieties. So if I was to advise really on anything to be really aware of this season, is to look out for yellow rust, perhaps on varieties at this stage that you wouldn't normally be expecting it in.
And again, I think to add to that, if you do find it in some strange ones, I've had personally a couple of occasions where people have found yellow rust in Champion already early on, not unexpected, looking at juvenile scores, but please send samples in to Niab. It's a free post service and you can get the form off the website, so it's a good service to run. So then, let's get down to the nitty gritty of it. We'll talk a bit about product choice for T1 now. We know what the weather conditions are like, it's quite dry. We obviously don't know what's going to happen in the next, well, maybe even 3 weeks until T1, and then the 3 weeks that the T1 has to work. So a bit of discussion around all those conditions and how that might change things, what we should target. Come to you first, Aoife, if I may, to talk a bit more of a wider picture, and then obviously to Daz maybe to talk a little bit more about some of the Bayer products that are out there this year.
Yeah, so really when we're talking about T1 choices, you have to think about the diseases that are present at that time and what the disease risk was in the past and also going to be in the future. So looking at this example here where we have the trial crop and also the farm crop next to us, two very, very different scenarios. So in the trial crop here at the moment, in the different varieties, we have a little bit of mildew bubbling at the base. Some of it is alive, some of it is dead. A couple of brown rust pustules, no yellow rust, and also quite a lot of septoria there. So in this scenario where you've got multiple different diseases and you don't really know what's going to happen in terms of will yellow rust come in, will the weather turn, so you have rain splash events, you don't know which of those diseases is going to take off. So you're going to need something broad spectrum in that scenario. And in terms of broad spectrum control at the T1 timing, it really is something based on isoflucipram or an Ascor-based product as well that gives you that all-round good control. If you have something perhaps where you're in a very high septoria and a high brown rust area, you might change your option there to include something like fentrifluconazole or other options there depending on the disease risk. But for sure, if you're in an area where your risks are much more broad spectrum and you're trying to cover a lot of different bases, and like something like an Ascor or an isoflucipram based product will be your product of choice there. And yeah, so I think that's the situation in a lot of different parts of the country at the moment, where we're not quite sure what's going to happen. We know that we have lots of different things bubbling at the base of the canopy. The weather looks like it's going to stay pretty stable with very little rain splash events. So the risks really are rust and mildew, and a little less risk there of the septoria coming up through the base of the canopy. So if you are thinking about a T1 product for septoria, for example, your product choice and your timings will be very different to a rust-based scenario. So in a septoria-based scenario, you're really looking at getting T1 timing when the flag or when leaf 3 is almost fully out, or at 75% emergence at leach, and also recognizing that you're probably going to need lasting protection from T1, possibly a T1.5 and a T2. In a rust-based scenario, you're going to have to start much earlier in the program. So starting that program at T0 and then continuing it to get on top of that rust early on.
My thoughts are that T1, as we're stood at the moment, is looking like it's going to need to cover a lot of diseases. Luckily, Bayer have got those products in the market. We're needing to be looking at covering off septoria, yellow and brown rust, mildew possibly. There is a bit bubbling about on a stem basis at the moment. You've got plenty of products out there. Ascra is a good choice as a T1. You've got the Vimoy Plus partner products, or you've got Plaxium, all of which are very broad spectrum in their activity on diseases and would be a good choice for T1 application.